Thanks for tuning in to My Valley, His Victory, hosted by me, Mackenzie Smith, where I interview Christians who love the outdoors and have walked through valleys in their lives. In a world of highlight reels and surface-level relationships, we all have faced hardships. I believe our experiences can be encouraging to others if we have the courage to be vulnerable. 2 Corinthians 1 says, "The Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God." My goal is to inspire you to come to the Creator through His creation and connect you with Christians who have been through similar experiences. I pray that this podcast encourages you if you are in a valley and pushes you to share how God has turned your past valley into His victory. This year, my goal is to spend more time worshiping the Creator and His creation, and to do that with like-minded women. So I partnered up with Audrey from the Trail North. We are bringing you 2 Christian women's retreats in Divide, Colorado later this year. Over this long weekend, you'll meet like-minded women who want to grow in community, worship in the outdoors, and challenge themselves personally. I can't wait to hang out with you, so shoot me an email at myvalleyhisvictory@gmail.com for more information or the registration link. Spots are filling up, so be sure to reserve yours today. On today's episode of My Valley, His Victory, we have Killeen Partridge. She is a high school history teacher and weekend warrior. She's been to 12 countries so far and spends her free time traveling and enjoying the outdoors. Killeen is also on the leadership team of the Christian Outdoor Collective and lives in Arizona with her dog Gunner and her retired racehorse Thoroughbred, Dublin. You can follow her adventures on Instagram at Killeen Travels, where she helps her followers maximize their weekends and love their 9-to-5. Thanks so much for being with us today, Killeen.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here, Kenzie.
Yes, I know I gave the listeners a little bit about you already, but why don't you go ahead and just tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I've been teaching for 8 years now. So I'm in the education field with high school. I love teaching high schoolers history, and I'm also the student government advisor. So that's what I spend most of my time doing. On my free time, I play in the outdoors, and that really helps me reconnect and just bring some peace to my life while I'm busy working, a 9-to-5 that's pretty stressful. And so I try to find that balance too. So that's kind of where I'm at. I love to travel. I'm always going someplace, and that's, it's been great.
Yeah, that's so exciting. I love that. And have so much respect for you as a teacher. I know that teaching has gotten really hard in the past couple of years. And so just kudos to you for being able to manage all of the moving pieces in that world and still make time to travel. Because I know a lot of people that have stressful jobs, they just kind of hole up at home and hang out and decompress. And
yeah,
kudos for you for getting in the outdoors.
Well, thanks. Yeah. I mean, I think it took me several years to get to a place where I realized I needed to get outside. And, I'd grown up, spending time in the outdoors and all that kind of stuff. But your first couple of years as a teacher are really challenging. If anyone knows what education is like, my first year I had 5 classes and 5 preps. So that meant none of my classes were the same, which meant I was lesson planning 5 different lessons every single day. So it was pretty stressful, and I was working about 24/7, it seemed like. So this is my journey of making sure that I've got a good work-life balance and things like that. So I'm pretty passionate about helping other teachers use their time wisely instead of just crashing on the couch, which is what I still do at times, but then also when I have a weekend to get outside and kind of refresh and recharge. So.
Yeah, and I love how you have brought the outdoors into your classroom with your big mural that you painted. I'm pretty sure you don't have windows in your classroom, right?
Right. Yeah. So I moved to a different classroom this year on campus, and it is a standalone building, but it has no windows. And nobody was willing to knock windows into the walls for me. And so I was talking about it with one of my students last year, and he was like, "Look, I'll design it for you. Just send me kind of the vibe that you're going for and let me design it." And so this was a student that graduated. So he's going to school actually for business, but he's really into design and wants to be into architecture and that kind of thing. And so I worked with him this past summer. He designed it out, drew it out, and then my mom donated her time too, and the two of us painted it, and took us about 5 days. So it's this massive mural that goes from like desert to mountains, calming colors, that sort of thing. Because I knew if I couldn't survive in that classroom, my students couldn't either. And so I have all that, and I have plants, and the kids just love coming in. They say it's really calming. They love looking at it. And so it just, yeah, if I can't be outside, I want to see some of that. If I can't have windows, I want to see that. And so my students and I love it.
Yeah, I've seen it on Instagram, and it's absolutely amazing. I loved it. And I was like, man, I can't believe your school actually let you paint that. And so that's really cool that they even, were able to work with you on some capacity.
Well, let's just say that I went ahead and did it. And once they saw the vision come to life, they loved it. So there's some times in education where you just run with an idea, and at the end, administration goes, wow, that was a great idea. And so that's how we got away with that.
Ask for forgiveness, not permission.
Exactly.
So speaking of the outdoors, what does outdoor recreation look like for you?
Yeah, so I go car camping a lot. If I don't have to set up a tent, I'm not going to. I've done enough of that, and I would prefer to sleep in my car. I've got a really nice mattress, and I can lock myself in, especially when I'm solo camping and road tripping. And so I car camp a lot, and I live in the mountains in Arizona. And so, 5 minutes away, I could go camping if I want to, so I can throw stuff in. So that's what I do right now. I hike. I've just gotten into mountain biking. In the summer, I kayak, and I take my dog with me then. He's so old right now that he can't hike with me, but he used to. And so now I take him kayaking. He just sleeps in the kayak, and we have a great time. So those are kind of my main things that I do in outdoors. But I also think that sitting outside with a cup of coffee is being in the outdoors. So I love doing that as well, watching a sunrise and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite from car camping to hiking to kayaking?
I think right now I do a lot of car camping, and I think I've learned that that's a really easy way to get outside really quickly with very little hassle and recharge. And so I can just hop in my car and go. And so I love that. Yeah, that's probably my favorite right now. But mountain biking is slowly becoming my favorite because that is a ton of fun.
Yeah. So for car camping, tell us a little bit about what that setup looks like and how you've made it possible with things that you already have.
Yeah. So I have a 2010 Subaru Forester that I sleep out of, and I'm 5'10", so I have to make sure I've got the room to sleep in it. I also chose to go with a setup that wasn't built out. And so what I do is I lay my seats down, I push my passenger seat up all the way and as far as it'll go so that I have the space for my tall body to sleep. And then I put my cooler in the bottom and then put my stove on top of that and a piece of cardboard and flip my mattress on top, and it works. And it's not built out anything. That way I can easily pull everything out super fast, throw it in the garage, and then pick up friends if we're going on a road trip or something like that. And so it's a really cheap, dirty setup, but it works really well. And I'm a big fan of not spending a ton of money to start a hobby just to see if you like it. Because at this point, now I've camped with it enough. I know more of what I like and what I would change, and none of it's built out so that if at any point I want to build something out, I know what I would want to do. And so this can still be my commuter car as well as my car camping setup. So I just have tubs in the back too with all my camp kitchen and that kind of stuff that's easy in, easy out. And it works really well.
Yeah, I agree with all of that because I think a lot of people, think they have to have this super expensive rig and they have to build all these things. And it's like, nope, you can literally go with what you have most of the time. You just kind of got to hodgepodge it together.
Exactly.
So I know in your bio, you talked about you've traveled to a bunch of different countries and you've kind of traveled a lot of the US, I think, as well. Do you have a favorite place that you've been and kind of why is it your favorite?
That's a great question. And I also hate this question because I love almost every single place for a variety of reasons. But I would say I love Switzerland to go hiking in. They have this really great concept that at the top of the mountain, they'll have a restaurant. So you just hike up the mountain and then you hang out at the top of the mountain. You've summited it. And then you just get a pizza or a coffee or a beer or whatever it is. And you just hang out. and then you can hike back down. So, but Switzerland is beautiful. I love that. I just went to Iceland this past summer and tent camped with some friends, and that was amazing as well. We got to ride Icelandic horses on black sand beaches and found this great little campsite 45 minutes down a dirt road, and it's beautiful. The people are lovely and all of that. So I'd say just the scenery and all of that was amazing. So those are some of my favorite like outdoor places to be. As I've traveled in the US though, I spent a couple years living in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and I still love that area. Just being able to get to the lake or get to the mountains. And they have, a lot of things to do there. So I'd probably say those are some of my favorites, though I don't like to pinpoint the top favorites. So
I totally get that. I'm always like, I'll tell you what my favorite was this year.
Right.
Because sometimes that's easier. Yeah, Iceland's on the top of my list, and I didn't know that you could ride horses on a black sand beach there, so added to the list.
Yes.
Bucket list item.
Yeah, we found this incredible company that treats their horses really well. Because often when you get into like trail riding and that kind of stuff, they'll use their horses too much. But these horses, they have enough in their herd that the horses might take 1 to 2 rides per day, maybe, and then have quite a bit of time to hang out, go to pasture, all of that. And they own all of the land. And so you actually riding to their own private beach. It's beautiful. It's incredible. I think it was supposed to be maybe a 3-hour ride, but it wound up being like 4.5. And so, yeah, I'll definitely hook you up.
Yeah, I'm sure that was a dream come true for you because you're a big horse girl too, right?
Yeah, it's definitely on the bucket list. Yeah, I grew up majority in Wyoming. And so I would spend a lot of my time bumming it at friends' ranches and just riding whatever horse they would throw me on, which is quite the experience. And you understand why the horse is called Little Buck. And you learn how to, ride a variety and all of that. So yeah, I enjoy horses and just the ability to get outside in a different way. My thoroughbred Dublin, I trained him back up. He had sat for several years. I bought him from his old owner who races horses down in the valley here in Phoenix. And so trained him back and we got him out. I got him out into the woods. And so we would just go on trails, and it's beautiful seeing the mountains from the back of a horse.
Very cool. That's one of my like dream trips is like taking horses instead of backpacking, like pack muling or, pack horsing into the mountains and setting up a camp and doing that whole thing. So
yeah,
very cool. So this is a Christian podcast. So let's talk a little bit about how the outdoors plays a role in your relationship with Christ.
Sure. I love this question because I think it's one of the reasons why I go outside. I remember, oh gosh, when I was probably 13 or 14, every summer we'd go camping in the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming. And I remember there's this little outdoor chapel there that we went to, and you go down a trail and you find this little chapel in the woods and you're surrounded by pine trees. And I just remember feeling the presence of God very deeply. And I always feel a sense of calm and just kind of glorifying who he is and praying while hiking and things like that. Like it's a very recentering feeling. And so I feel like he uses the outdoors to just show his love and his care and just the beauty of his creation. And so I feel much closer to him when I'm in the outdoor space. And so spending time in nature, just sitting outside, breathing fresh air and just talking to him has been really powerful. And, a space where I can disconnect and hear his voice. And so I think that's been probably the biggest reason why I go outside to connect with him and then to kind of recenter from, kind of the stress of life.
Yeah. I feel the same way. I think that I feel so much closer to him. I'm spending intentional time with him. I think that it's so much of what we need in our day to day is to just, like you said, get outside and have those intentional moments.
Yeah.
Do you have a specific story you could share with us about maybe a way that God revealed himself to you in the outdoors that sticks out?
Sure. I've actually never told anyone this before because in my head, it sounds a little odd, but I know it was like an experience. And so there was this there's this hike outside of Coeur d'Alene where I was living. This is where I got my first teaching job. And so I moved out to Idaho. And so there's this hike there. You can kind of hike up a mountain, and it was near where I was living. And so I'd take my dog and we would just go, and I would use it as just like a time to pray for people, pray, for a variety of things and that sort of stuff. And I would just keep doing it. And I remember one day coming back, you're hiking down the mountain, and then there's this spot that opens up and it's just pine trees and all this. And I remember just praying, and I wasn't like praying out loud or anything, but I remember praying, God, I just love you. Like, this is incredible. Like, I love you so much. And thanks for hearing me pray. And I remember hearing his voice say, I love you. And and I stopped. It was enough to make me stop. And I stood there and I went, I'm pretty sure that was audible. Like, it wasn't just in my head. Like, I felt it. It made me stop. And I went, wow, like, what? And so that experience, just like hearing his voice say, I love you, when you're spending time with him, I've never heard, there are different ways that I feel like he speaks to me, but to hear an audible voice, and, and people can go, well, maybe that wasn't him. Maybe that was just your mind, but it pulled me up so fast that I can't get it out of my memory, that I'm like, that was the audible voice of him just saying, I love you. And just knowing that, he was there on that hike with me. And so I don't know, I hold on to that, as I'm spending time outside, and just appreciative of that moment of him just being like, I love you. I'm like, okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah, that's sweet. Like, just a super sweet moment, especially because you were having the moment of like, I love you. And it was kind of like that. Yeah, I love you too. Like, I'm here with you. Like, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
What hike was that? Do you remember what it's called?
I think it was Canfield Mountain.
Okay. I did that one when I was there.
Yeah.
And that's what whenever you were talking about it, I was like, I'm pretty sure I've done this one. So I know you live in the mountains in Arizona, but for someone who might be listening that lives in more of an urban area, maybe down in Phoenix or, just those more city areas, what are some ways or a piece of advice you would give them if they want to start connecting to God through the outdoors?
Yeah, I love that question. I think I went to school in Richmond, Virginia, which is a fairly large city, and you can find parks and things like that. And so that's what I would do. As a college student, you're kind of broke, and so I would go to parks and pack a lunch or something like that, and just hang out and read scripture and journal and pray and just breathe fresh air. And I think there's a lot to be said for that, is, whether it's on your balcony or you find a park, if you've ever been to New York City, Central Park is kind of an oasis in the city, or there are so many parks. Like, let's say, you're going to Paris. There are amazing parks in Paris where you can just sit on the grass and breathe fresh air, and you're not listening to the hubbub of the city, and you can kind of quiet your soul and quiet your mind and take a moment and, just read or pray or journal or create art, whatever it is that kind of helps you disconnect and kind of reconnect to your creator and to, I don't know, I want to say yourself, if that doesn't sound too crazy.
No, I don't think so. I think that that's true, because I think we get caught up in the hustle and the bustle, and we get caught up in the people pleasing and everything that we have to do for other people. And so I think it's really important to spend time with God, but then also spend time with yourself.
Yeah.
So I don't think that sounds crazy.
Okay, good.
Okay, well, switching gears just a little bit, I would love for you to share about a valley or a season of wilderness that you experienced and kind of what God taught you or prepared you for maybe in that season.
Okay. Yeah, let's dive in. We'll probably have a conversation about my time spent on Maui. So I took a teaching job on Maui in the summer of, I think it was 2018. And so I packed everything up. I shipped my car out there. I got on a plane and I moved out to Maui. And the night that I stepped foot on that island, my left leg started swelling. And so I had no idea why. It was just maybe like, you're in an airplane. Sometimes that can cause issues, things like that. And so here I am on a new place. I don't know anyone. I'm starting a new job, and I'm starting to have an issue with my left leg. It took me a week or two to get to the doctors. And of course they did an ultrasound to make sure it wasn't deep vein thrombosis, which is, you get that a lot. People get that a lot when they're on airplanes and they're not moving enough. It was not that. They couldn't figure out the cause for that. And so I started the school year with my leg swelling. And if you know anything about swelling, it hurts really badly. And I had dealt with anxiety and panic attacks some previous to that, but they were starting to get worse because we didn't know what it was. And of course, I started to catastrophize. Like, it could be this worst case scenario. It could be this or that. And the doctors were just like, oh, like, it'll be fine. Just give it like 8 weeks. You've probably injured yourself. So don't walk, don't, do all this kind of stuff. At the same time, I'm teaching. And so teaching is I stand and I move a lot. And so standing, the gravity doesn't help. And so my leg was just kept swelling really, really badly. And so for months, this was like, first semester of the school, I'm writing curriculum. I'm, trying to figure that out. I'm in a new place and dealing with an undiagnosed medical condition and just being told, oh, we'll just wait. And so at the same time, I had a family member walk out of my life who I thought should have been there in that moment. Like, I still can't talk about it without getting emotional. And so they had walked out of my life, and so I'm dealing with that as well. And I remember going, God, like, you screwed me over. I did all of this for you. I went on missions trips. I worked at this Christian guest ranch. Like, I worked with youth groups, I'm telling people about you. Like, I love you, all this stuff. And you screwed me over. And I thought for sure you wanted me to come to Maui. Like, it felt like so much that you had put me there and you screwed me over. And I think in that moment, I think sometimes we like to sugarcoat it, but God already knows what we're feeling. And so I remember going like, I did all of this for you. And like, why are you doing this to me? And we still, I was starting to see like different types of doctors. So like non-traditional doctors and things like that, to see if they had any answers for me and things. And one medical professional told me my leg was swelling because I was tall, to which I went, I don't think you know anything about the body. And we need to keep seeing other doctors. But through all of that, I remember holding on to, I think it's like Psalm 91 that talks about how God will protect you and he will shelter you. And even in, what is it, the 23rd Psalm, he says, I will, though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you will fear no evil, for I am with you. So in that moment, it was like, here's all this stuff that I felt like he had done to me when I didn't deserve it. But it was those months of like unanswered prayers, no diagnosis. We couldn't figure out what was going on, months of it, I don't know if I want to say trauma, but there was the trauma of like moving and all of this happening at the same time and all of that occurring and trying to work through that. At the same time, I'm like holding tightly to these scriptures that he's going to be with you. There's that verse in Isaiah where he says, you keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. And I remember going, I think I have a wrong view of God, because in my head, it's become very transactional. I did this for you, and therefore you're going to keep me in perfect health. You're going to do all of this kind of stuff. And we're not promised that. But I think in our culture, it's very easy to fall into that, right? Where it's like, I do this, and therefore God's going to do this. And so in that season of like searching and being super open and honest, I had to like kind of relearn the character of God, the sovereignty of God, the fact that I had believed unintentionally, I think, this very transactional relationship, where it's like, I do this, and so therefore I get this. And I had to relearn who he says he is, and that he is sovereign over all of these things. And it's hard when you keep praying and God doesn't answer it how you want him to answer. And so I think that's when you don't hide that. You go to him and say, here you go. These are all my thoughts. This is what I thought. Would you help me through this? Would you show me who you really are? Would you show me what's true and what I've learned that isn't true about you? And so there was that, that whole season. Like, I remember just the anxiety being so bad. Like, I was on the floor of the bathroom, like in tears. And then 5 minutes later, just getting up and going, I have to go teach kids history. and then having a panic attack in class and going, you have to keep it together. You have to keep it together. Like, because I got to teach these kids. And so like all of that, I think, your body carries a ton of that stress and things. And so it was a really horrible, I'm going to say, like, it was not a fun season of life. We can look back on it, I think, and go, yeah, God brought me through, but he did, but also it was awful. It was not a fun time to be alive. And I finally got to the point where my leg wasn't healing. I was getting no answers. And the medical system is really quite bad on the islands. You would think it would be good because doctors want to go live in paradise. But the problem is the cost of living is so high that pulling people in, it's just a challenge to keep them, where it's like they'll be there for a couple years and then they'll leave. And so the medical system isn't the greatest. And so I had to go in pretty strong to a doctor on Maui and be like, yo, you will send me to a specialist because you have no answers for me. And this isn't healed. Like 6 months later, my leg is still swelling daily. And so they finally did. And so they flew me over to Oahu because that's where all the specialists are. So I flew over to Oahu and I did a more, holistic isn't the right word, but another ultrasound that wasn't just with my leg, but it was up into my torso and all that to see if there were other issues that were causing this. I mean, one doctor had been like, well, maybe it's a tumor, maybe it's this. And of course that doesn't help because you're like, great, now I have a tumor maybe. And so you're freaking out about that. And so the specialists couldn't see anything from that ultrasound. And so what they did was they told me, okay, we're going to fly you back to Maui. And on Maui, we're going to send you into a CT scan. And if we can't find anything on that CT scan, then we'll let you know. And so this was, if COVID hits kind of like spring break of 2020, I'm going in about, spring break was March. So this was probably February. I'm being flown out. I've had this since July of the year before. So they're flying me out to Oahu. Then they fly me back and they say, okay, go do a CT scan there on Maui. And I remember being in the waiting room and I'm just an anxious person and doctors freak me out. And so I really struggle with like keeping that kind of in check and going and doing all this stuff. And I was doing this all alone. I didn't know anyone. I hadn't had the chance to really get involved with any church or anything like that. So I have no family around, no friends, nothing. So I'm doing it all on my own. And so I go to this CT scan and I'm sitting in the waiting room. And I remember thinking, I keep coming back to that verse of like, you keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. And I remember sitting there and telling God, okay, you said you'll keep me in perfect peace. You said you'd give us peace. Like you say you give us peace. Peace I leave with you, not as the world gives, but as I give it. Where is it? Like, where is it? Because you said you give it and I'm still waiting for that peace. And would you please just give me a dose of it? That would be great. And I remember just like sitting there in that waiting room, just telling God, like, yo, you gotta give me this peace. And in that moment, just it washes over me. And I've never felt that like immediate like wash over going, oh, it's going to be okay. Whatever happens, it's going to be okay. And he answered that like just a very desperate cry of like, I need it right now because I can't keep doing this, months and months of like not knowing and all of that. And so he washes me with this peace and I go into the CT scan. I go, okay, whatever happens, it's, my life is yours. I've already decided that. And so I got a call a week later, actually at work, which is not the best place to tell someone their diagnosis, but it was nice knowing. They called me and they said, look, we didn't find anything on your CT scan. We haven't found anything in any of your tests. There's nothing. And so the cases like this, we call it lymphedema, this condition of your lymphatic system that stops your lymphatic system, basically stops working. And sometimes it's caused by different things, but there's a vast number of us where they don't know the cause, and just lymphedema in general, there's no cure. And so this is a chronic illness that I get diagnosed with. It's going to be with me the rest of my life unless Jesus heals me before I die. And so in that moment, there's the relief of finally knowing like it's lymphedema. Okay, there's not a tumor, there's not this thing or that thing. And I finally have a name for it. But God hasn't healed me. And so I think sometimes we expect God to answer our prayers in the way we want him to answer our prayers. And there are people I know who have been healed of things. And I think for those of us with chronic illness where we have not seen healing, the promise of healing is still there. He is the great physician and he will heal me. And it may not be on earth. It may be later. And so in that, when you're going through that, I think sometimes it can be frustrating, when people are like, oh, let's pray for you. And it's like, great, he hasn't answered that, but I think, I think it's James 1 where, the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And in that time, so I get diagnosed, right? And then I'm on Maui through the next school year. So that's like a year and a half. I live on Maui for 2 years and then decide to come back to the mainland after that. And during that time, we're still praying for healing, and I'm still to this day praying for healing. But what God did was, one, you learn about who he is and that he will be with you through those things, which gives you something to hold on to the next time you're going through a valley, right? Because you can look back and say, you brought me through that valley, just like David does. You brought me through that. And so I'm going to trust you for the future, which is easier said than done, of course. But he also used it in the lives of people I came across on Maui and even in my classroom. And so I can look at that and go, well, God, you didn't have to put me through that. But because you did put me through that, one, I'm able to I saw a traditional Chinese medicine doctor for a year after that to see if maybe alternative medicine could help make it better or cure it or something like that. And I honestly don't think I was going there for healing. I think God was putting me in the life of Dr. Malik, because we had all these conversations about faith and what I believed. And then he was starting to read some of the Old Testament and we were starting to have conversations. And then the same thing happened with my hairstylist. She just one day turned to me. She was like, how's it been or something like that. And all of a sudden I'm telling her, here's what happened in my life. And she goes, how did you survive? And I said, well, I didn't, God sustained me through all of this. And let me tell you about that. And so I think, to this day, I had a student this year who has a chronic illness and they were commented about how difficult it is. And so I can say, yeah, I don't have what you have, but I have a chronic illness that means that teaching is really hard because it's standing. So it swells every day. I have to wear compression every day. There's the fear of if I get pregnant, potentially down the future, it will make it worse, chronically worse. So there's a question about that. There's all those sorts of things that, complications and things like that. And I remember just telling the student, I was like, look, I don't have what you have, but I do have a chronic illness and it is hard. And I'm here for you in whatever way you need me to be. And just know that I understand to the extent that I can understand as someone who has chronic illness, not someone who has what you have, someone who understands chronic illness and the fact that it lives with you every day. And so I think through all of that, God has used it to just teach me a lot about himself. But then even now realizing that you may go through a valley and you'll probably go through another one. And so you have to look back on that and hold to his promises and hold to what he's done and trust him for the future, knowing that in the end, he is making all things new. For who else holds the words to life? He holds the words to life. He's making all things new. And so that's the hope through all of that journey. That's the hope that I have. And so I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just so encouraged by you and just the way in which you went through that valley and relied on the promises. I think that's when knowing scripture really comes. It's why memorize scripture and why do these things? And it's because in those moments, you need something to hold on to and something to meditate on and something to get you through it. And if you don't know those scriptures and if you don't know those promises of God, then you don't have that to lean back on. And so I just think you said so many amazing things. I can't even touch on them all, but one of the things I really love that you said was you had to correct some lies that you believed about God. And I think that that's really important. And I think that that's something that a lot of us have these assumptions or these preconceived notions maybe of what God should do. And it's that he's never promised that once in the Bible.
Right.
And so I think that was, I love that you said that and that you had to correct some things that you believe that were not true instead of relying on those things that you thought should happen, and I think that's really, really valuable. So for a listener who might be going through something similar or is dealing with a chronic illness with maybe a season of not knowing what that illness is, like you were, where you were going to doctor after doctor after doctor and they just couldn't figure it out. What piece of advice or what encouragement would you give to that person?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been trying to think about what I would have wanted to hear. And I think there's this phrase that I heard, I think from another podcast at some point, where it talked about either your mental health or whatever you're going through. It's something you're going through. So it's not something that you're going to stay in. And I think as a Christian, the truth of that is that we are going through it. So let's say God doesn't heal me. Cool. He will heal me. The truth of it is that he will heal me. It may not be in our life right now, but it will be when I go home to be with him, where there's a new body, there's life with him, and the hope of an eternal, beautifully restored creation and all of that. And so I think we have to remind ourselves that we're going through it. And so in that sense of like, it's not something you may feel stuck in it, but the truth is he's taking you through. And so it's not something that you're going to be stuck at now. It may be a very, very long time. Like for me, it may be my entire life here on earth that I'm going through lymphedema and chronic illness and that sort of thing. But the truth is we go through life and he walks with us and then he restores at the end. And so I believe in a God of restoration, a great physician, a God of hope. And I think often we can hear like trite little sayings and we can use that to kind of become angry at God. But if we dive into who he is, that's when we know what we can rely on. And so that would maybe be my other piece of advice is I think often we can listen to well-meaning friends or, culture and become very angry at God for what he's allowed instead of going, wait, who is he? What do we know about him? What do I know about him? What do I know about his promises? And diving deeper into that. Like you said, I had to correct incorrect views about who he was. But instead of being angry at him because he wasn't who I thought he was, I went, okay, who is he? And if I believe in a God of the universe and all of this, then he can handle all of my questions, all of my searching, all of this frustration and anger at people in my life who weren't there for me, and sadness and all of this kind of stuff as I'm processing, diagnosis and no diagnosis, all the things. You go straight to him and to his word and all of that. And so that would be my other piece of advice is, especially when you go through a time and you're like, God, you're not who I thought you were. You've allowed all of this. Even in Job, right? He still turns to God. And so he must be able to handle that. And so you've got to reach into that word. You got to read that word. You got to get into that. And you've got to have people around you that love him. Don't isolate yourself. Bring other people in. People who love Jesus, who can say, God is still for you. He is not against you. He still loves you. He's still there for you. And so I think, those, the people who didn't live in Hawaii, in my life, but, lived, I have one friend who lives in the Middle East, and she would message me and she would just be like, yo, I'm praying for you. I'm here for you. You came to my mind today. And you need people in your life to say, hey, we're going to come around and we're going to pray. And that's what we're going to do. And to this day, I've had people in the Christian Outdoor Collective just come alongside me and just pray over my leg. And you need people to just remind you and to be there for you. And so that would be another piece of advice is as you're searching out who God is and you're trusting on him and you're learning about him, have people in your life that love him, that can remind you when you can't remind yourself of who he is, and to walk with you through it. And I think that's the beautiful thing about community and people that love Jesus. And that's what we should be doing for, people in our lives who just need someone around them to say, hey, I'm praying for you. And this is a crappy situation, but we're going to be here and we're going to pray and we're going to trust God that in the end, he is the great physician. He is renewing. He's making all things right. And so I think that's what I would say to myself years ago, but also to anyone who is dealing with that today.
Yeah, I think that that's very important. And I'm learning so much through doing this podcast, and I'm always inspired by the guests and especially you and just the way in which you know God and the way in which you talk about him. And even I needed that reminder today of, and I think this in a way is community, right? Us doing this together, and the reminder of that this body is not eternal and that we are going through it, even if it takes our whole life, because I know me specifically, I have a poor eternal mindset. I think about just my time here on this earth, and I think that like, this is all that I have. And then I have to remind myself or be reminded by people like you, like, no, there is a whole nother life that's going to be way longer. This is just, a blink or, a piece of dust in the grand scheme of everything. And so I think that even just you sharing that today, I know I'm impacted by that because I need that reminder constantly because, yeah, like I said, I don't have that mindset as often as I should.
Well, and I would say the same thing about myself, right? It's so easy to know it in your head, but to feel it in your heart. And I think that's where a lot of my anxiety comes from, is that feeling like this is the only life I have. This is, and if something goes wrong, oh my gosh, instead of the truth will set us free. And the truth is that this isn't our home. As my dad says, he's not getting older, he's getting closer. He's getting closer to life with Jesus, right? He's getting closer to a new body.
Beautiful.
I love it, and it's true. And so you can know it in your head, but like you're saying, you have to be reminded. And I don't want anyone hearing, listening to this episode and going, Killeen has it all figured out. I don't. I'm back on anxiety meds this semester because it's been a really hard semester for me for anxiety. And I'm going back, and this has been really helpful, to be honest, Kenzie, to be able to say, wow, there's a lot that God did. I can get so caught up involved in what my worries are for today and for tomorrow. We're told not to worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will take care of itself. I'm sorry, that's really hard to do. That's so hard to do. But just doing this and reminding myself of wow, God did a lot. And God's still doing a lot, and I can continue to trust him. So I hope no one hears this and goes, oh, she's got it all figured out. I don't, and I'm still struggling. And I think that's the thing about a valley and a mountaintop, is that there are many valleys and there are many mountaintops. And so it's a journey. Life is not this straight uphill climb. It's just more of a roller coaster at times.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And I think that it's so helpful. And I love, we're recording this right before Christmas and right before New Year's. It's so important to take the time, whether that's, once a quarter, every 6 months, once a year, to look back and remind yourself of everything that has happened and all of the ways in which God has showed up, because you're going to need those as you go into the next valley. And so I think that, you said that this has been really helpful, and I hope that it's helpful to other people. But I think that each individual needs to do something like this as well, even if it's just journaling and remembering all of the things that God has done. Because when we're in these valleys, it can seem like, oh, where's God? And it's like, well, he's been with me through this valley, and he's been with me through this valley. And I think that there's something in the Bible where they're called Ebenezers, which are they write them on their staffs, right? Which are reminders of things that they went through and how God was there for them. And so I think that we need those in our life. And so I'm glad that this has been helpful for you. And I know that it's going to be helpful for those listening with chronic illnesses, or maybe even just with anxiety or whatever it is that they're dealing with. I know you have dropped so many good nuggets in this for somebody. And I think almost anybody listening can take something good out of it, even if they're not dealing with a similar valley. So for the listeners that want to follow along with you, Killeen, where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram, at Killeen Travels. That's where I do a lot of my posting about adventures and getting outside and loving your 9 to 5. So you'll see educator content. You'll see a glimpse into my classroom, but then you also see me traveling and hanging out with friends and camping and all of the things. You can also follow along the Christian Outdoor Collective on Instagram or on our Facebook group. I'm on the leadership team for that organization, and it has just filled a need for a Christian community that love the outdoors and love Jesus. And I'm excited to see where God takes it. And I kind of feel like this was just a gift that he kind of placed in my lap this year. He put me at the right place at the right time. And it's just been a huge gift. And so I would encourage any listener to get involved with the Christian Outdoor Collective as well and go spend time in the outdoors with other lovers of Jesus. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
Yeah. And if you guys are ever in Arizona or end up meeting Killeen in real life, she will also make you a super awesome espresso latte at the top of any mountain because she is a coffee extraordinaire. And I didn't even know such a thing was possible, but we went camping together and she has this like on the go espresso machine and made me a latte. I didn't know there was a coffee shop at the top of a mountain, but apparently if you go camping with Killeen, there is.
Well, we're going to find it. Yeah. So shout out to Bellman espresso machines. A friend of mine actually gifted me that. She sent it to me after a really difficult season. She was like, here, I think you need this. And so, yeah, you can just make your espresso and your lattes. And yeah, Kenzie, we just had so much fun hanging out with you, and you were in Arizona. And yeah, any listener, Kenzie is just the real deal. And we had such amazing conversations. And so what you hear on this podcast is who she is. She loves Jesus and she wants you to love Jesus. And God is turning her mess and my mess into his message. And so I just shout out to Kenzie for hosting me here. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to meet up with me and then have this conversation. And it's just been really encouraging.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for those kind words. And it's been a pleasure. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of My Valley, His Victory. If you or someone you know are interested in being on this podcast, please email myvalleyhisvictory@gmail.com.